Hey guys, I'm out in the sun. The sun, I know. I'm out picking dandelions because I'm planning on doing a little bit of cooking with some dandelions today, specifically dandelion honey and also a dandelion and apple jam. I have no idea whether or not they're actually going to work, but I'm out to pick the dandelions anyway, so you might as well come with me. Now, when you're looking to pick dandelions, you should be looking for a healthy looking flower. Even if you know nothing about gardening, that should be fairly obvious what it is because it's the most appealing to the eye. So these here are lovely and plump. They've got full petals, in full bloom as well. They're not scraggly looking in any way. The plant looks quite healthy, so these would be fine to take. They're the only two in this area though, so I'm not going to take them. As a general rule, you should only take about 10% of any of the flowers in one area, because they're excellent plants for pollinators like bees and butterflies. Hoverflies really like them too, and pollen beetles as well. So I think I've got enough. That looks like enough to me. That does look like a lot. I know I've told you not to take too many, but I promise you this isn't many compared to what I actually found while I was out walking. There are so many dandelions around at the moment. They will dye your hands. You can probably make yellow dye from the flowers, I would imagine, as well as food. So obviously wash your hands when you get home. You'll probably end up bringing some beetles home with you as well. I have a rather large collection of pollen beetles in the bag there. I don't know if you can actually see. Oh, there's one. They can fly. I'm going to leave the bag in my garden when I get home, leave the top open so they can just escape. And then once they're done, I'll wash the flowers and I'll put them in the fridge for a little while before I start cooking with them. Look at them. They look like a bag of Indian marigolds, don't they? So I'm back at home with my dandelions. I'm in non-fancy clothes. After seeing what they did to my hands outdoors, I didn't particularly want to wear anything fancy. I would recommend you do the same. Don't wear anything nice because you're probably going to dye yourself yellow while you're cooking them. The recipe I had to do overnight, so this is actually the next day from the previous shots. I had to cook some of the dandelions down last night and leave them to steep overnight for this particular recipe. This would be for the dandelion honey. So in here, I don't know if you can see that, there are 2 cups of dandelions, and then there is a cup and a half of water. Well, that was simmered for about 15 minutes last night. Counted 15 minutes from the moment it came up to simmer, and then left that. And you just have to leave it with the lid on overnight. Anywhere in the house, doesn't have to be in the fridge, and then it's ready to use today. What we need to do with now is strain them through a sieve into another container, and we need to measure the weight of the water because we need to put equal parts sugar into the water to create the honey. Now this isn't a recipe for a huge amount of honey, it's only going to make probably about 1 jar, if that, because there's not an awful lot of water in here. What you need to make sure you do is squish down your dandelions to get all of the juice out of them. I think that's about all I can squish out of them now. There's not an awful lot of use for the squished dandelion heads. I'm actually just going to use these as garden mulch, so they're going to go outside in a little while. Normally it would be mostly just flower heads and not very much green in here, but where I left my dandelions overnight, they sort of wilted a little bit. So they ended up looking a bit more like that, which isn't ideal and does make it really hard to remove the green, but that's fine. Normally you would use your dandelions as soon as you get home after you've washed them, but for the purposes of filming I haven't been able to do that, so I'm just going to make do, see how it turns out. If you do this all in one day, you're probably going to get a much better result from your dandelion honey and for the jam I'll be making later. So to keep the measurements level, I'm doing it all in grams even though this is liquid. So I've got 117 grams of liquid in here, so what I'll need is 117 grams of sugar. And then it's going to go back in the original saucepan and then boil for about 15 minutes until it becomes sort of thick and honey-like in texture. Very simple. Now I'm using golden caster sugar. The recipe I'm using doesn't specify what kind of sugar to use. This is just what I had the most of, so that's what we'll be using. So while that's boiling down and doing its thing, over here I've got some jars that are sterilising. So to do that I just fill them with boiling water Then I'll chuck it out before I fill them with the honey and the jam later. So obviously as you're cooking it, it's going to thicken up a little bit. I did have to add an extra bit of sugar to this one just to get it going. It is starting to thicken up just there, but I have taken it off the heat because obviously as it cools it's also going to get even thicker. While it's still hot, you need to pour it into your sterilised jars, so I'm going to do that now. So while the honey was still boiling, I started chopping apples. This will be for the apple and dandelion jam. It's sort of a made-up recipe, kind of. It's based on a dandelion jelly recipe that I found, but I didn't have all of the ingredients necessary to make it, so I've sort of adapted it a little bit. I don't really know if it's going to work, it's the long and short of this. It could be a disaster, it could be absolutely delicious, but you know, we need to try new things, don't we? So I've got 2 Granny Smith apples and 1 Pink Lady apple. These contain quite a bit of pectin, more than most apples do, and a lot of the pectin is in the skin, so I'll be keeping the skins on. And the dandelions, I've got about 100 grams left there out of what I picked. And technically, the original recipe required a quart, which turned out to be something like 800 grams of dandelions. That's a crazy amount of dandelions. I wasn't going to pick that many because I thought I would deplete far too many areas of flowers. That's just silly. And so what I've done instead is add the apples for weight as well as pectin. So that's what we're going to do. And it starts off the same way as the honey. You've got to boil the dandelions for a little while in water. And it's got to be sort of equal to the end amount. So we've got roughly 500 grams of apples and dandelions. So about 500 grams of water into the pot with it. Now these poor, sorry looking dandelions aren't going to end up in the end product. We'll get the flavour, but not the flower heads. But you still need to cut the stems and the little green crowns off the bottom, which is kind of hard when they're this pathetic looking, but we can do it, it's fine. I just do it with my nails. You can obviously do it with a knife as well. I just get somewhere in the bottom of the flower head and pinch and take the bottom off. Now the main reason you're not supposed to use any of the green in this ingredient is because the green leaves on a dandelion tend to be a bit bitter. But that's the only reason really, so I'm not too offended by it all being in there with the flower heads. I think I've still got enough to get a really nice sort of sweet flavour from them. So I'm just going to boil this down for another roughly 15 minutes until you get a decent liquor out of the flower heads, and then we'll move on from there. So I've had these boiled for a little while, started to fall apart, they're really satisfying, look at that. We need to leave it to cool before we strain them though, so I'm going to go do some other stuff around the house and then come back to it. So the dandelions have cooled off, so now we're going to put them back through the sieve just like before into the pot, and then I'm going to measure out the same amount of sugar as the rest of the liquid once again. But before I put the sugar in, I'll put all of the apples in with the liquid and stew that down a little bit so that the apples become mulchy and release all the pectin into the juice. So as mentioned previously, this recipe is almost completely made up. What's happened here is I've boiled away all of the water. Wasn't quite supposed to do that, but the apples are as mushy as I want them to be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit more water and then add the sugar in with it and cook that down until it's a jammy sort of consistency. Starting to look a bit more jammy. Well, actually it's starting to look a bit more like chutney. I did mash the apples a little bit while they were boiling back down again, just to kind of release all the pulp a little bit. And the sugar mix was both the golden caster sugar, and then because I ran out of that, I just used up some brown muscovado. So it's got that really sort of treacly smell to it as well. If this works, it's going to be delicious. Just needs a little while longer to boil off a bit more water, and then I can stick it into jars. So the jam is pretty much ready now, I think. I'm imagining it will thicken up a bit more as it cools, just like the honey does. So I'm just going to ladle it into my clean jars. Reuse jars. Always reuse your jars. And then I guess we taste them. So there was enough jam in that pot to fill 2 chutney sized jars and just a little bit extra in that one. My honey has crystallised. Not sure why, but I'm not too worried because a lot of the honey I buy crystallises anyway. We've gotten quite used to just dunking them in a little pot of boiling water just to loosen it up before use. But I'm going to try it anyway, see what it's like. God, you know what, that's really lovely. I'm pleased with that. Oh yeah, absolutely. It's not exactly like honey. That is a really hard flavour to replicate, I would imagine. But it's a bit like golden syrup with a floral kind of taste. That's really good. Also vegan, so any vegans can use this as a substitute for honey if you're avoiding that at all. So ideal, really. Let's try the jam. Now I haven't let it fully cool, so it is still a little bit liquid, but do you know what, the texture looks really good. Might just be the sweetest thing known to man. That's blooming good though. Oh, that's a good day's work. So what I'm going to do then is link in the description below the video the original recipes that I used to base this on. So now that I've created myself an awful lot of washing up, I'm going to go do that. Thanks for watching again, guys. Try this out, it's really good. I think if I was going to do it differently in any way at all, I would probably use more dandelions in both recipes. That is the only thing I would change, really, because I think it's worked out pretty well. Thanks again, guys. Bye.